One of the episodes, that's 6 episodes, they're serialized, and one of the episodes is the length of a normal book, right? So they're just huge. So it's like put it on, it's like get the audiobook and put it on the fastest it'll go, like 3 times, where it's like bap, 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 and just try to get enough in the time that you have. But one of the things that makes this world so complicated is it's like there's nanotechnology that makes like the rich people look like they're in their 30s, even though they're in their 80s. And there are people who look their age, and there are people who have done weird manipulative things with like their Beam ID, such that they look like they're in a shell of somebody else, like they're mimicking on the beam or something like that. And so remembering all those details was really, really interesting, because what I would have said originally is that I had a hard time remembering the details. It's not entirely true. What's true is that at the top of my head, consciously, I have a really hard time remembering the details. But when I'm in the flow, I remember the tiniest details. I don't know if you noticed that as you're editing, Sean, where I'm like, I'm going to throw this in, this guy's name that we saw for 3 seconds in season 2.
And it's the same when I write too. Like I get really intimidated. I don't know how I'm going to return to this. I don't know how I'm going to figure some crazy thing out. But yeah, like, I mean, creativity works in amazing ways once you kind of start going, and if you can't hit the flow, your brain will take care of the hard stuff.
I know, and that comes across when you're reading. That kind of like lived in detail. And like I remember there was I think I actually read a series of yours, like the alien invasion one, before the beam, and there was a mention of the beam within it as like an Easter egg thing.
Oh.
And I'm like, and I love the confidence of just like, this is going to be an HBO series, and like you get this sense of like a labor of love. Like, is it that like when you had, there was the very first draft and you guys start working on this together, and there is this idea of not just there's a new internet, but the new internet, and then you have the entirely new political system, and then you have this entire global apocalypse that happens and all the ramifications that flow from that. Like, how did you guys? What was the first conversation like? Because I would just imagine that there would be so much to dig in on, and like Johnny, so many questions for you to think through, and then like Sean, for you, like the world building where it's already there. Like, was this like a gardening kind of thing where you were kind of growing what was in that draft, or was it like that you were exploring what the new internet would be like? Like, how did that feel?
So sort of the question, if I'm hearing it right, is a little bit like, it's so overwhelming, how do you even begin? Is that right?
Because like you have the seed of this, and then kind of how you actually expand that into a world that you both kind of you're both fully seeing and living in this thing, and somehow there's a shared universe that exists in your heads that you're relating to the rest of us.
Well, as far as the mechanics of actually starting, one of the things that's true, I think, of most of our work, there's several things here. So the first is that I need a grain of truth, usually substantial grain of truth, to believe the story. So
Which is why he hates superheroes. All right.
Well, I'm not a big fan of superhero movies because I don't believe that the Earth's yellow sun makes somebody able to fly. I don't give a shit where they're from. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I was working on just kicking an idea around recently, and I was trying to find like theories in physics that would support the story machinations I wanted to do. And there was this moment where I was like, dude, it's fiction. Like, you don't need physics to support you, but I do. So that's, I think, why when people say that our stories feel like they're real, I find that very flattering, because that's something that I kind of need as a storyteller. And so even the alien invasion stuff, I mean, yes, we're dealing with aliens invading, but from book 2 on, we did a lot of research into like ancient astronauts, ancient alien sorts of things.
Oh, I would say book 1 on. I mean, remember the original package for that? All the ancient alien stuff, even the ayahuasca stuff. Like, I
remember the ayahuasca stuff, yeah. But I remember really digging in and being like, there's this bottomless hole, that exists somewhere. There's all this really cool stuff that really exists.
I guess you're right. Like, once we expanded, we really got into like the Moab stuff and all that history.
So I think that's why things feel real, is because I usually insist on it. And I wrote one of the Fat Vampire spin-off books, I mentioned that series, takes place in, Sean actually gave me the idea. It takes place at the World's Fair in 1870 or something. It was the one in Chicago where H.H. Holmes
1898, yeah.
was
the serial killer guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had the murder hotel. And so, like, I couldn't just make up a serial killer. Like, I researched the dude extensively, and like, when did he come and go, and where were these gaps in his? So I'm always threading a story through whatever real things I can. So I think that's why it feels real. And the other thing is that I don't like what I feel is overdone sci-fi. So the original season of The Beam, no offense intended to the writer, but to me, it was not at all what I would want to read. It felt I described it as a Cockney discussion in Radio Shack. So it felt like there was a lot of like really, really technical terms that were jargony for the sake of jargon. And so I could be totally wrong about this, but I firmly believe that people ultimately remain people, no matter whether they're flying in spaceships or digging underground or whatever they're doing. So I focused on the first chapter of The Beam focuses on Natasha Ryan, who is a singer, a celebrity. And so she's giving a performance, but then there are political, like, troublemakers in the crowd. And I just threw in a little bit of like, well, this is throw in shift, throw in directorate, throw in enterprise. And then the next chapter is with Doc, who's an add-ons dealer. So he deals with nanobots and like little things that implant in people's heads and stuff to connect to the beam. But Doc